everyone. My name is Adrian Battle-Marston, and welcome to another episode of TU Stories. This is our first episode for the spring semester, and we have a special guest with us here this afternoon, and I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves.
The first episode.
I
no
know.
pressure.
You're a big deal, Alejandra.
I am Alejandra Balcázar, and I am the LatinX and Undocumented Student Coordinator.
How long have you been with us here at Towson?
A little bit more than a year. Just a little bit.
Has time flown by a bit here, or is it kind of? I know sometimes higher ed can move like super fast pace.
Super fast.
Yeah.
I don't feel it's enough time to be here, and then I feel that I have done so much that wow, it has been only a little bit more than a year.
Yeah. It is shocking that it's been nearly 3 years since I've been here.
Do you feel like it?
No, it doesn't at all. And I should be used to that because all of my employment has been in higher ed, and that's how it's always gone.
Yeah.
But I think for some reason, I think some of it was also COVID too.
Well, I don't know what happened after COVID.
Gosh.
That time
It was rough.
Yeah.
So I came in, and this was like we were still going through like a bit of a transition period back in person. And so I did my entire interview process online. And then there were some hybrid things going on. And then the fall semester ends, and then we get like another like big outbreak in that Christmas, New Year's time, I think of like 2021.
The Omicron.
Yeah. And so we spent, I think, that first month of spring semester in virtually. So it was like, this is just chaotic, you know. And I mean, you hear stories from students, and that was just a mess.
I don't miss that time. No. I had to teach virtually.
Oh, yes, you were a teacher.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't miss it. And then we had hybrid, so I had some students at home, some students on campus, and we had cameras following us.
What was that like trying to navigate of like, you're trying to be attentive to obviously the students in person, and then like, you're like, oh shoot, there's people that are watching me on the camera, right?
A couple of times I forgot to start the Zoom session. I'm sorry. They had the day off, but that happened.
Yeah.
It was too much to manage.
Oh,
I
my
did
goodness.
my best.
We all deserve a lot of grace during that period.
Yeah.
You know, because we were honestly just kind of learn as we go.
I hope they learned something. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure they did. You know,
one can only hope. Right?
That's what we're gonna do. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
So you've been here about a year, and man, you've done quite a bit here.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, it's been impressive to see. It's been impressive to see. And you sort of wear two hats here a bit.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend some time to sort of break them both down, unpack them a bit so that people can get a chance to get a deeper understanding of what you're doing for both, sort of the vision that you have for it, and like how things are going so far, you know? Yeah. So on the one hand, we've got LatinX student development. All right, so just a bit of a brief history here. There's two endings. I know we actually did a video on that last year. Could you give us like a brief synopsis on like why you feel like it's important to have both when you're sort of presenting this title to people?
Absolutely. When I got here at Towson, we were using LatinX, which is a correct term to address the non-binary students or non-binary individuals who belong to the Latin American identity, right? Yeah. But this Latinx, the concept came, it was an English-centered. So I like to think that this Latinx was like my little baby, my first change here, because Spanish is very important for our culture. It is not the only language in Latin America. We also have French. We also have Portuguese.
Yeah.
However, the Latinx was giving the importance of the non-binary concept in the primary language.
Gotcha.
Now, we also have students that don't speak Spanish. or students who identify as Latinos, Latinas, Latine, but they don't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
So they still identify as Latinx. So it's important to acknowledge both identities, right? So like we go with Latine, Latinx, and we interchange both because both are correct, but we talk about both.
So a lot of what you do in this role for the student development side, you described it as exploring and trying to cover the different aspects of their identity.
Yeah.
What has that been like? Because you just described a lot of different identities, people speaking different languages, different ethnicities, different races are sort of all like connected in that. How do you sort of factor all of that when you're programming? Because that's a lot to cover.
It is a lot. We are so diverse.
Yeah.
Linguistically, racially, culturally. It's not because we belong to the Latin identity, it's all the same.
Yeah.
And that is one of the stereotypes. And we talk about this like, everybody's Mexican here. No, no, we are not. And we come from different backgrounds. And we need to create these spaces where our group culture as Latinos, Latinas, Latine, it's celebrated and it's honored, but at the same time, those differences that make us unique, they also have space there.
Yeah.
So like creating spaces to reaffirm the identity, but we are also creating spaces because we also have room for improvement. So like spaces to reflect, for example, on who we are, those pieces that we want to heal from our community as well. Stereotypes that we need to break, and we need to help other people understand where we are coming from, because that is so important. So like when I am creating these programs, when I am working for the Latina students, I really try to identify programs that are going to be culturally fun for students. So like when we talk about windows and mirrors, right?
Yeah.
So like for our students to be like, oof, this is the food of my country. Or like, I know this song or this folk tale. I remember my grandmother telling me about this. But then for other people that don't share the identity, come and just learn a little bit about who we are, but at the same time how to support us. I think that in this country there is a big conversation about how to be an ally and how to support, and the Latina community is one of those communities that is just starting to have some support. Not all the communities are being having allies like this, and it's important to create these spaces for other people to learn about our experience as well.
And you mentioned a couple of things, particularly with making spaces for the different identities there. One of the things that I remember we've talked about before is how complex race can be in this community. So not to go through like a full-on history lesson, why does this make it so complicated? So obviously, I have family that's Afro-Latine. And the conversation of race is not just tricky, but it can be very sensitive too, right? Because you're talking about like someone's personal identity and what they identify as. Are they Black? Are they not Black? Are they Hispanic? Are they not Hispanic? How do you sort of navigate through all of it? And I can imagine there are other types of examples similar to that. What's it like navigating through that kind of intersectionality there, like constantly?
Well, it's just talking about colonialism. That's what happened to us. Like we are very mixed because we are the result of that. So we are mestizos, we are Black, we are white Latinos. And I feel we are doing the work of talking about race and colorism, but we are not doing the work of like how it is in our countries. We are talking about in this American context, right? But like we need to start reflecting of like what does it mean to be white presenting in Latin America, or like in my case like a white Colombian. How do we support Afro-Latinos, because it's going to be very different in the context where we are. So like again, like we can be mestizos, we can be sambos. I remember growing up like learning about these different skin tones, and there was a name if you were mixed. For example, if you were African and you were mixed with indigenous, that had a name. And we learned all those pieces. We don't talk about that here. Also because in this country you are one thing or the other. Like there is no spaces like this census when you have to complete the box.
Oh my gosh.
white, Latina,
Right.
all of the above.
Exactly.
I don't know. That is the hardest piece for me to complete a form. I don't know what I am.
Because there's no room for that.
No.
You know?
Yeah. Also, like talking about like, oh, in my case, I'm a woman of color.
Yeah.
Go explain that in my house. Because in Colombia, I'm white Colombian. So it's like, what are you talking about? Woman of color, like, you get sunburned. I know.
Oh, yeah.
You know? So like, it's navigating those pieces of the identity.
Yeah.
And do my best to transfer that to this context. And opening the opportunities to learn about that.
Well, you bring up something that I'm not always sure people are familiar with, and I'm still learning about this, of how colonialism played a role in almost creating internal biases that can sometimes exist in different home countries. Yeah. How does that conversation even begin? Because some of that can feel like rooted deeply in the way that we view certain things, you know?
Yeah, well, in a lot of our countries, there is like this standard of beauty. So like, which is very white center. So it's like, oh, if your eyes are blue or green, if you are blonde, and then they talk, oh, the baby, ay, qué bonito, it is so cute. Or they tell you like, oh, mija, you need to marry somebody that looks like this. And it's usually like this stereotype of like whiteness.
Yeah.
But navigating those complexities of like, of beauty, like what is beauty, in what context, what makes you more beautiful or not. So yes, there are a lot of internal biases there of like, also like how people are treated because of the way they look, because of their skin tone, you know, it's very different. We see like a lot of people like changing the color of their hair or like getting contacts, you know, like always trying to get, but then we also see people like getting fillers or like their body shape is changing. It's very complex.
So one of the things that I remember you sort of sharing when we talk about intersectionality in this particular community, one particular area that I feel like can kind of get left out is the indigenous side to things. And you've sort of gone on like your own personal journey as you sort of navigate through this, and you know, we can talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that I didn't always think about is how closely tied the indigenous side of things are tied to, particularly, let's say like Mexican identities for just one example. We talked about like certain words that have indigenous roots to it, and I'm like, that would have never crossed my mind. You know what I mean? Yeah, you're saying, I have been thinking about where I'm coming from. And I remember growing up, my dad is from a region in Colombia that is called Popayán, which is south. And my mom mentioned like, oh, your dad has connections to the Guambianos. The Guambianos is an indigenous community in the south of Colombia. So I was reflecting on that, like, I need to have some kind of in my DNA. So I have been thinking about where I'm coming from, some of my practices, but also talking with other Latinx friends that have been navigating those pieces, and they are like in a very more advanced level. They are already reconnected with different practices, like with different herbs, medicinal traditions, food, language. I'm just starting. But I am really curious to see where I'm coming from, like what is out there for me, you know? Talking about, and like, again, like I cannot do this alone. So like engaging in conversations with these friends, just to talk about different parts of, like, we use, for example, Palo Santo, or with sage, or we believe in this spiritual aspect of who we are. So this is something that I did before. I remember for the World Cup now, I was with some friends when they are from Argentina, and you know, they won, but they were using Palo Santo, and like they were Palo Santo and saging everything during the game. And I'm looking at them like, this is not a game, you know, like it's actually like, let's put some support out there. But where is that coming from? Like, it's rooted in us, and we don't know where it's coming from. This is so fascinating because, so obviously ancestrally, my history comes from Africa. More directly, though, my family's from Jamaica, and because I grew up in the Christian setting, there can be a lot of Eurocentric ties to what is considered valuable, what is considered moral or ethical. And so there are a lot of practices that could probably exist in different African countries that would be deemed as sinful. They'll use like oh, this is demonic. You're channeling into powers that are evil. And so I can imagine there are a lot of people of color who are trying to unlearn a lot of that and seeing the value in there could be something that could bring value to my life from a culture that I was disconnected to that has been kind of demonized for several decades, whether that was good intentions or not, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life, and then my university is a Jesuit community as well. But I was always like curious about what else is out there. Is this the only faith out there?
Yeah.
I remember I had the chance to go to Cuba in 2017, and I went to this performance. They were talking about Yemaya, they were talking about Santeria and the goddess of waters. And like, I'm super curious about that. Like, where is that coming from?
Yeah.
Why did it get lost? And did we have anything like that within my region in Colombia? Like, we talk about Chia and Sue, which are the indigenous names, the Muiscas names for moon and sun. So like, those were our beliefs. But again, like colonization, then this was imposed on us. So I have been really curious about what other beliefs. I believe that there is something out there that is bigger, that protects us, that takes care of us, and that's part of faith, right?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly which one it is. Yeah.
That it's such an uncomfortable growing pain, you know. Like in my own journey of like accepting there's probably multiple truths out there. And you know, I applaud you for going on that journey also.
I love that there are multiple truths out there. You know, doesn't need to be that there is one. When I was in college in my undergrad, like my thesis was called English for VIP, for various indigenous peoples. And I remember it was an English class because the requirement of the government was to be bilingual. But these students, indigenous, they were already bilingual in their languages. But the government didn't accept that as the requisite. So they had to take English classes. And because I studied modern languages, I was the monitor of that class. But I was in this room with like Arhuacos, with Totos, like so many indigenous students. And they would bring this. It was one of my favorite moments of my week, was to be in this English class, and they would bring, I remember they were mambeando coca, which is like chewing coca leaves. Somebody was licking ambil, which is made of tobacco. And I was curious, so I was like, what is this? And they were telling me like, this is to open our mind to a different level. And I remember one of them, an Arhuaco, he gave me some coca leaves. So you probably have seen these indigenous, they're wearing white, they are from the snowy mountain, the Sierra Nevada in Santa Marta. They all wear white because it represents the snow.
Yeah.
And they have two bags. One, they carry their belongings, two mochilas. In the other one, they have the coca leaves. And one of them gave me leaves. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, but thank you. And he said, like, listen, I'm giving you this because you are giving me your knowledge in English. So we are exchanging wisdom here. That to me is beautiful.
Yeah.
And we don't think about that, you know?
No.
I miss those days.
Man.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot just a little bit in terms of your role here, because you're sort of serving two groups.
Yes.
So we've got our both of our flyers here, Latin A, LatinX, student development, and then we also have undocumented student resources.
Yeah.
Now, typically when people think about undocumented immigrants, there's normally a demographic that immediately comes to mind here.
Yep.
And what I'm hoping people are learning is that is an umbrella term that can meet and define a lot of different groups of people.
Yes.
So I guess one of my questions for you is, since you've been here and obviously you've probably done similar work prior to being at Towson, what are some of the common misconceptions that you have learned about that people typically associate when it comes to undocumented immigrants?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many misconceptions. And I am doing this job because this is my people. I am myself an immigrant.
Yeah.
So I went through all this process. So of course people are going to say like, oh, undocumented people. I don't want to say only students. Illegal, which is like the first word that I mentioned. I'm like, nobody is illegal. This dehumanizes the experience. This dehumanizes our people. Of course, that most of the undocumented immigrants are Latinos.
Yeah.
That's another one there. That we are going to steal jobs. That they are uneducated. This is not true. And for those immigrants that cross the border, so for those immigrants that come to this country and then they are under this undocumented status, I always think like, oh my God, like how was your life? What were you trying to leave behind?
Yeah.
That you are putting your life at risk? That you are willing to go through all these different stereotypes, negative experiences, that you prefer that and not be in your countries? Like what was happening there, you know? So like I always feel that most of the time the immigrant experience carries a lot of pain. You are leaving somebody behind, you are leaving a place behind, your home. Like your whole existence has to change.
Yeah.
So it's like always that feeling of like missing something, right? And like one of the things that I'm really trying to do is like bridge those gaps. At least try to make this country or like this local space into a safe space for them, a place where everybody belongs.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, again, like I cannot do this alone. So like working very hard with our community members to create that space, at least to try to help a little bit with that feeling of like, I'm in this new place, I need to get a job, I have a family, I don't speak the language, right? And I don't have a community to support me. It's so hard.
I mean, you mentioned something that I think people don't always often think about is when they hear the word immigrant or undocumented, they think Mexican. But when that happens, you really do sort of exclude the experiences like of a lot of other undocumented people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So here at Towson is very interesting because most of our undocumented students come from Africa. But in Maryland, most of the immigrant communities are from Central America. So to me, it's like so interesting where they are coming from.
Yeah.
And then their experience, their needs are going to be so different at the same time. I had the chance to be in a listening session a couple of weeks ago with different immigrants from Africa. And then they were talking about like, we don't have language access. A lot of the information is not in our language and we are not fluent in English.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of gaps there. But a lot of them were also mentioning, and when I mentioned earlier that immigrants, one of the stereotypes is that they are uneducated. What they were talking about was like, we already have this international education.
Right.
To transfer that is so expensive. You don't even know how to transfer your transcripts, how to get that from your college, and then the education here is not accepted. So now these immigrants what they have to do is go through a whole different path because they cannot validate, or in Spanish we call it homologar, this education, right? And then when I was listening to them, this was my experience.
Yeah.
Like I had already my degree in modern languages, and then I had to pay a lot of money for me in that moment to get my transcripts. They give you, a lot of our immigrant communities and people don't realize this, so many processes that you don't know how to apply, how to start.
Oh my goodness.
One of the things is that they gave me this envelope with my transcripts. It has to be sealed. This was 10 years ago, and I still have that sealed envelope at home, and I protect it just in case I need it. Like, why? Other people don't think about this, you know? and then your transfer and transcripts are in a different language. Now you have to translate that.
Oh my goodness.
It's so much money that people just decide to go to other kind of jobs because they cannot access education.
Yeah.
Why? Why do we need to make it so hard?
I mean, and you brought up something on the stigma that I think can sometimes come up when English is not your original language, that gets associated with like a lack of intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I remember you sharing, I think it might have been in your presentation when you were interviewing here, where you talked about how many immigrants, both undocumented or not, they are constantly translating in their head.
Yep.
That is so much brain power you are using 24/7, really, mm-hmm. especially like whether you're in school or in a business setting. And I don't feel like people always realize that in and of itself is a level of intelligence that's a little underrated.
100%. 100%. So yes, translating is you have to translate your whole life into a different language.
Yeah.
And it takes longer to think what they are talking to you about, or like to think what you have to answer. I am an expert in making up words because at this point, I don't care. Like, did you understand? Yes, perfect. I don't have the time or the energy to like keep translating these things, right?
Yeah.
But that not everybody is at that level. People are they feel so uncomfortable. And I want to share this story. The other day I was invited to a school in Baltimore City for Hispanic Heritage Month. And this was students from many different ages. And I gave my presentation. I said, I'm going to take questions in English and in Spanish. And then this little girl raised her hand, maybe like, I don't know, second grade. And she asked me in Spanish, how did I manage not to get embarrassed with my accent? Girl, that took me so many years of therapy. But when I answered to her in Spanish, I finished my session, thank you for coming, bye-bye. And then the teachers told me, this student has not spoken to us at all because she doesn't speak English yet. And the fact that she felt empowered to do it in Spanish, that's everything for me. Like that right there is that why I do this job. Meeting with our undocumented students, I speak French as well. And then the other day I was talking to one of them from Congo, and I talked to him in French. And his face just changed of like the break.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh my God. I cannot explain what he was going through, but just his face of relief. And we just had a casual conversation in French, but it was like, oh, my brain is having a break.
Yeah, yeah.
It is so much work. It is so much pressure trying to understand your whole life in a different language. People don't understand how hard it is. Like taxes, legal communications, medical, applying to all this. It's very hard because you can say, oh, yeah, I speak English. But you don't even have this language, like specific or professional language. It's very hard.
You mentioned a couple of things in some of our previous conversations, particularly when undocumented students come to you for assistance, for help. What are some of the common asks that undocumented students come to you for that seem to happen often?
Money.
Yeah.
Yeah, financial aid. There is money, and of course we are in a state university, and the funds are state funds. So it is very hard to allocate this money to undocumented students. So for us, and the only way we can do it is when we find private funds, when we go to like nonprofits and they have scholarships. So students, again, like let's talk about an 18-year-old. I don't remember what I was doing at that age.
Oh my gosh. Don't even
Probably
remind
not
me.
very smart. But our students are trying to apply for scholarships. They are writing these essays to say why they deserve this, right? They are writing essays in English. Let's come back to our previous conversation.
Right.
It's not their language. So they don't get access to the scholarships because the essay was not strong enough. They don't know how to complete all these forms. It's very confusing. So the MISFA, it just changed names. They require so many documentation. Yesterday, somebody was telling me, the same with the FAFSA. Somebody was telling me, Well, the only way to get it now is when you do it on paper. Because let's say that you have a student who is an American citizen who was born here, but their parents are undocumented. They don't have a social security, so they cannot complete this online.
Yeah, because it won't let you go to the next page unless you fill that part. Oh my goodness, I didn't even think about that.
So now they have to do it on paper. Go find that PDF, complete by hand.
Oh my gosh.
Send it in mail.
Yeah.
That's gonna take super long. So for what a student takes, let's say, an hour. I know it's way more than that. But for an undocumented student or a student who is a mixed status family, they don't have access to this.
That's weeks.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. So like they ask me like, how could we complete these forms? I cannot complete the forms for them, of course. So that is one, financial aid.
Yeah.
And then the other one now is there is this perspective of the good immigrant, bad immigrant. What, like right now, they are in college, they are getting educated, but once they are out there, they are stealing our jobs.
Yeah.
So these students, they don't have a work permit, of course. So how are they going to access a job, even an internship? So when they come to my office, Alejandra, I'm about to graduate. I need an internship. And here I am trying to find a place for them to be able to get this internship so they can graduate. And then we can think about what we're going to do after graduation. Again, because I cannot do this alone, I have been building a lot of relationships with different organizations, different offices. And so now it's like, hey, so-and-so, how do we do this? Can you help me with this? But at this point, it's like knowing people and making network on behalf of these students. You know, so I attend a lot of meetings, a lot of events with the government, with like programs for immigrant communities, because they are going to tell me, do you know about this program? They are giving scholarships right now. Boom, I send this to the students because they don't know how to look for that. Mm-hmm.
So when we think about people not in your role that are empathizing with this cause and wanting to provide support for undocumented immigrants and the students that are here, are there some things that we can try to remember when we're looking for more ways to support them?
Yes, I would say the first one is be mindful about the different immigration statuses. Because not everybody is undocumented. For example, we have DACA recipients, now it's being rolled out. But those students that we still have that are DACA, they do have a work permit. Mm-hmm. But think about it. If they have a scholarship, let's say, but they also have to work a full-time job, now these students cannot be a full-time student, and now they are losing the scholarships. Yeah. So things to consider is if we could reassess, for example, those funds that we have here, those funds that are private, foundation, donors, gifts, private scholarships, and then dismiss this piece of citizenship or permanent residence, that would help so much because now students can access that money. Yeah. Think about their basic needs. Some of these students don't have food access, they don't have clothing, they don't have books. I'm gonna share a story from one of our undocumented students. I told her what do you do with these classes that require books? Books are very expensive. Mm-hmm. And she told me, oh no, I just enrolled classes that don't require books. What?
How are you going to graduate? Oh my
But gosh. She cannot afford books.
Yeah.
So can somebody donate books, please? Like, we really need those things. A computer. Like, these different, like, I'm still, and I see your face, I don't know what we are going to do with our students that don't have access to the material that they need.
I've had a loss of words. I'm not going to lie, Alejandra. Because I remember struggling. Some of these books were like $200-$300, and I'm using them for 4 months. Yeah. That's it. Oh my God.
Yeah. They cannot get a loan because they don't have a social security. Yeah. They are not set up for success. No. Period. Because they don't have the resources that they need. And I know And I really hope that with this talk, people will be able to understand a little bit better of their experience. And that's what I do. I advocate for these students. And I'm happy to have the uncomfortable conversation with people on their behalf. You know, there's just so much lack of resources for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My last question for you, and you've sort of woven this throughout this entire interview so far, but what would you say is your why behind what you do?
I feel it here already.
I know.
The why is my people. The why is that when I came to this country, I was the other.
Yeah.
And that hurts so much. People making fun of my accent. People thinking that I was not smart, that I was uneducated. And I promised myself, I'm getting emotional.
That's okay.
That the younger generations wouldn't feel like that anymore if I could change that.
Yeah.
That's my why.
I am always surprised by how similar so many of our whys are the more I do these conversations with people. When I was an undergrad, there was no office of inclusion. There was no VP for diversity. There weren't even that many Black faculty and staff. We may have had maybe like one or two staff members that just out of the goodness of their heart, it's not even in their job description, but they saw the lack of support and sort of took it upon themselves. Yep. Can't even imagine the toll that does on them physically, emotionally, mentally. And so, yeah, that's...
Yeah, I'm tired.
You know?
Yeah.
And it is such a reminder for me of like, just a matter of 6-7 years ago, a lot of these spaces did not even exist.
Yeah, that's true.
You know?
That's true.
So I commend you for the work that you're doing, Alejandra. I'm always in awe of this sort of coalition you're building here for these students. That can't go enough thank you thrown in your direction.
I love my job. And you said like it is not easy to have all this work on myself.
Yeah.
But these students need representation because there are no many representation for them. They need to see that they can be professionals, that they can do better, that they can be CEO, that they can make their own businesses, that we are smart. Because somebody was telling me this yesterday. The Latino community, you can go to certain jobs because you don't have access. Why not? Yeah, because it has not been easy for those that we are accessing those jobs.
Yeah.
So we need to create these spaces for our students because they deserve it. It's not they need it, but more than that, it's like they deserve it because they are bilingual, because they are fluent culturally, like they can change and like switch codes. We talk about that a lot. They have all this global perspective. They are aware of what's happening. Especially our undocumented students, they are aware of immigration changes all the time. So they are like mini lawyers. I really wish that they didn't have to know that because they didn't have to worry about that.
And it's forcing them to grow up so fast.
Yeah.
So much faster than anyone else.
Not a lot of our students are thinking about how I'm going to support my family once I graduate.
Yeah. I went back home.
Yeah.
I went. That's right. Me and my sister, we knew we'd be fine.
Yep.
You know? Mm-hmm. It's such a blind spot.
It is. So our students are not young in that aspect because now since they were little, they needed to understand what it was to be undocumented. So they just a complete different set of skills because of their experience and of priorities as well. Yeah.
So for anyone that's trying to locate you or your office, where can we find you?
You can find me at University Union 343, Office C. I think. I don't know, 2 offices from yours.
You'll see the sign.
You'll see the sign. Just ask for me. But also on Instagram, we have our CSD account, Center
Yes.
for Student Diversity. Send me an email as well, A. Balcázar. I'm happy to help. Even I also work with families, immigrant families that are not at Towson yet.
Yeah.
It is so important that somebody speaks Spanish for them.
Yes.
And that hopefully shares the Latina identity.
Alejandra, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Woof.
Oh.
It was a lot.
I appreciate you. This was a great time to get to know you, the work that you're doing, and the progress that we're making here.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
We need more people to support.
Slow and steady. Is that what we're getting at?
Yes, hopefully.
Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time. See you, everyone.